My stepmother locked me away, told my fiancé I was dead, and he married my half-sister. They froze when I appeared at the wedding. My name is Elodie Duval. I'm 27 years old. I never imagined my life could unravel so quickly, especially when everything seemed so perfect. Gabriel and I had been together for 4 years. He was patient, attentive, and loved me in a way I'd never known before. His presence was comforting, reassuring, and I often found myself smiling alone just thinking of him. Our engagement had happened just a week earlier, during a private dinner with close friends. The kind of evening that lingers in your memory, warm and golden. I was floating in a haze of happiness, imagining our life together, our apartment in Chicago, weekend getaways to the countryside, cozy mornings with coffee and laughter. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, cracks were forming. Patricia Morin, formerly Victoria Stanton, my stepmother, had always harbored an underlying disdain for me. She masked it with a polished smile, sweet words, and a pretense of maternal care. But I felt it in every glance, every slight smirk when she thought no one was watching. She'd casually criticize my clothes, my posture, even the way I laughed with Gabriel. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself she was just difficult, that everyone has their flaws, and maybe she was adjusting to me being part of her life. Sophie, formerly Emily, her daughter, was a different story. She seemed harmless, always smiling, always helpful. But there was something calculating in her eyes, a subtle eagerness to please Patricia at all costs. I'd catch her watching me sometimes, quiet moments of observation that made me uneasy, though I could never pinpoint why. I felt like I was being measured, judged, and cataloged for a purpose I couldn't yet perceive. That evening, I remember I was preparing dinner in the kitchen. Gabriel had gone to pick up flowers, a spontaneous gesture he said would brighten my week. I was humming softly, light and content, when Patricia appeared, gliding into the kitchen as if she owned it. She placed her hands on her hips, smiling too widely. "Elodie, darling," she said, her voice syrupy. "I hope you're being careful with that knife. You wouldn't want to hurt yourself, would you?" I laughed it off, brushing past her. "I'm fine, Patricia." "Really?" She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I just worry about you. Gabriel has so much on his mind. It would be tragic if something happened to you before the wedding." Something in her tone twisted my stomach. I laughed again, forcing it to sound light, but unease crept over me. It wasn't concern. It was control. Subtle but undeniable. The weeks passed, and her behavior grew more insidious. I noticed how she'd intercept Gabriel's calls when I was in another room, small deliberate annoyances like misplacing my things or giving vague instructions that planted seeds of doubt. Sophie, always nearby, mimicked her mother's subtle manipulations, making little remarks that seemed innocent but carried hidden barbs. And then came the day I was taken. I'd been invited to help with a garden project behind the house, a task Sophie had suggested. It seemed normal, mundane, nothing to warrant suspicion. But the moment I stepped into the shed she'd prepared, Patricia appeared behind me. Her face was cold, her hands firm as she shoved me inside. The door slammed shut. I pounded on it, screamed, but she'd locked it. No key, no explanation, just a small ration of water and a whispered promise that the world would believe I was gone. I heard her footsteps fade, Sophie's muffled laughter echoing faintly, and my heart stopped. My mind raced. I banged on the walls, called Gabriel's name, but there was only silence. Hours turned into days, and a terrifying realization took root. Patricia had told everyone I was dead. She'd taken everything. My freedom, my voice, my life as I knew it. Shock and disbelief consumed me, leaving a hollow ache in my chest, a terror that grew with every passing hour. I collapsed onto the cold wooden floor, tears streaking my face, dirt and grime smearing my skin. Every thought revolved around Gabriel, the life we'd planned, the home we were supposed to build together. And in that suffocating darkness, a single defiant thought began to grow. I would survive. I had to survive. She couldn't take my life so easily. The first days in that dark, stifling shed were unbearable. I counted the hours in silence, my stomach gnawing with hunger, my throat parched with thirst. The only light came from a small, grimy window high above, but it was never enough to lift the weight pressing down on me. I tried to keep my mind busy, repeating Gabriel's name, recalling our laughter, the warmth of our apartment, his gentle hand on mine. But despair crept back, relentless and cold. I scavenged what little I could find. A stale piece of bread tucked in a dusty corner, a cup of rainwater that had pooled in a small crack in the wall. Every bite, every sip was precious, a reminder that I had to survive, no matter how weak I felt. I slept in short bursts, curled up, listening for any sound from the outside world, hoping someone would come, hoping someone would notice my absence. Memories of my life before the imprisonment played in my mind with heartbreaking clarity. I remembered Gabriel surprising me with flowers, our late-night talks about our dreams and plans. I remembered laughing at Sophie's awkward jokes, unaware of her silent complicity in my eventual captivity. Patricia's smile, always so polished, always so controlled, replayed like a knife twisting in my chest. I realized how subtle her manipulation had been, how carefully she'd orchestrated my isolation, and rage ignited within me. I began testing the shed, running my hands over the walls, tugging at the door, examining every seam. The lock was old and rusty, the wood brittle in places. My first attempts were clumsy, exhausting, often leaving me bruised and bloodied, but I refused to stop. Each failure strengthened my resolve. I reminded myself that Gabriel believed I was dead, that Sophie had taken his hand while I was trapped, that Patricia had orchestrated this cruel theft of my life. Anger became my fuel, transforming fear into action. I learned to ration my strength, conserve my energy, while pushing the limits of what my frail, starving body could endure. I created a routine, exploring the shed for weaknesses, eating tiny crumbs, drinking water only when necessary, and staying awake at night, planning my escape. The darkness became familiar, almost comforting, a space where my mind could sharpen and my resolve harden. Sometimes, I whispered to myself, imagining what I'd say to Gabriel when I saw him again, how I'd confront Patricia and Sophie. Those imaginings gave me strength, though they also brought tears. The pain of longing and betrayal was almost too much to bear. I clung to the hope that if I could endure, if I could survive, I could reclaim everything that had been stolen from me. Days stretched into a week, and I noticed patterns in the comings and goings outside the shed. Sophie lingered near the window occasionally, Patricia's heels clicking in the distance as she moved through the house. I memorized their routines, timing my movements, searching for the moment when the door would be least guarded. Every sound became a clue, every shadow a potential path to freedom. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found a weak seam along the door's corner. My hands trembled as I pushed and pried, feeling the brittle wood give slightly. My heart pounded, the promise of freedom tantalizingly close. I pictured Gabriel, the wedding preparations underway, and the injustice of my absence fueled my urgency. I knew I had to act quickly, or it would be too late. Even as my body ached and my spirit wavered, I whispered words of encouragement to myself. You're stronger than this. You won't be forgotten. You'll survive. Anger and hope intertwined, giving me the clarity and courage I needed. I understood then that surviving wasn't just about living. It was about reclaiming my life, my love, and confronting the deception that had tried to erase me. I pressed my hands against the door once more, feeling the lock give slightly. It was fragile, yes, but it was a start. All my energy went into pushing, pulling, forcing until the door opened just enough for me to slip through. Freedom smelled of dust, rain, and opportunity. My feet hit the ground, bare and trembling, but my spirit soared. I was alive. I was free. And I would not be silenced. Even in the darkest moments, strength grows quietly. Patience and resilience cultivate hope, guiding us toward justice, love, and the courage to reclaim our lives. I had barely caught my breath when the first signs of the wedding reached me. The news hit like a thunderbolt. Gabriel and Sophie were to be married in less than a week. My stomach churned violently, my mind swimming in disbelief and fury. How could he plan this while I was locked away, invisible, declared dead? How could he, the man I loved, prepare to say, "I do," to someone else while I suffered? The injustice burned hotter than any hunger or thirst I'd endured. I forced myself to think clearly. Panic had no place here. Only strategy could save me. I recalled every detail of the shed, every weakness I'd noticed in the walls and lock. I traced my fingers along the edges, feeling the brittle wood, the rusty nails that had held me prisoner. Sunlight through the high window barely touched the floor, but it illuminated enough for me to inspect my small world meticulously. I knew the time to act had come. Sophie's name echoed in my mind. I remembered those quiet, careful smiles, the way she mimicked Patricia's subtle cruelty, the way she'd taken my place so effortlessly. I'd confront her, but that could wait. First, I had to regain my freedom and stop this wedding, even if just for a moment. The thought of seeing Gabriel, even briefly, pushed me to focus. Every ache in my body, every bruise and cut, became fuel. I found a weak seam near the shed's back corner that I'd tested before but never fully exploited. Today, desperation sharpened my senses. I pushed, twisted, and pried, hearing the soft crack of wood giving way under my hands. My heart pounded in my ears, mingling with the chirping of birds outside, oblivious to the human drama unfolding. The lock was rusty and stubborn, but gave way under my persistence. One final push, and the door opened just enough for me to slip through, a narrow space between darkness and the bright, cruel world beyond. Outside, the air hit me like a shockwave. Warm sunlight on my bruised skin, the smell of rain-soaked earth mixing with the familiar scent of the garden I'd once tended. I froze for a heartbeat, letting the sensations wash over me, drawing strength from the world that had been denied me for so long. I moved cautiously at first, listening for the inevitable sounds of Patricia or Sophie discovering my escape. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying both the scent of freedom and the tension of an impending confrontation. I mapped my path to the venue in my mind, visualizing the streets, the cars, the quiet neighborhood roads. Every step had to be careful but swift. I couldn't afford to hesitate. My bare, scraped feet carried me forward with a mix of exhaustion and determination. My dress, torn and stained from my captivity, clung to me in uneven patches. Yet I barely noticed. Every movement was a statement. I would not be silenced. I would not be forgotten. As I approached the street leading to the venue, I paused, listening. Voices floated faintly. Sophie, Patricia, perhaps some caterers or wedding staff. Everything aligned in my favor. The household's attention was elsewhere. I pressed on, each step bringing me closer to the confrontation I'd imagined for days, weeks, maybe months. I thought of Gabriel, the man who'd loved me, who believed I was dead, now standing at the altar, unaware he was about to marry someone else. The idea of facing him tightened my chest, a mix of apprehension, longing, and resolve. I allowed myself one deep breath, savoring the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was my moment, a chance to reclaim my life, disrupt the deception, and confront those who tried to erase me. My hands clenched into fists, my gaze sharpened, and I ran the final steps to the venue, a blur of motion and raw emotion. The doors loomed ahead, the sounds of the ceremony filtering through. I straightened my posture, squared my shoulders, and prepared to face everything I'd endured. Each second felt eternal. The decision to act, to confront, to survive, had led me here. I stepped forward, and with one final surge of courage, I entered the bright, pristine hall, ready to face the world that had declared me dead and stolen my love. The venue's doors gleamed under the midday sun, polished and pristine, reflecting a life that had moved on without me. I hesitated for a brief moment, letting the sun's warmth hit my face and chest, feeling every scar, every tear, every ounce of struggle that had carried me here. My bare feet pressed against the tiled ground outside, each step sending a shiver of fear and anticipation through my body. I was bruised, exhausted, and filthy from weeks of confinement, but I was alive, and that alone made me feel invincible. I adjusted my torn dress, smearing more dust across it as I moved. My hair, tangled and damp from the rain I'd passed through earlier, clung to my cheeks and forehead. Tears streaked my face, staining the remnants of dried grime, giving me a wild, raw appearance no makeup could replicate. I glanced at the cars parked along the curb, the hum of excited guests, and felt a surge of adrenaline that forced my body to move. This was it. There was no turning back. I ran the final steps along the sidewalk, each heartbeat pounding in my ears. The venue's doors were in sight now, grand and gleaming, an ironic reflection of the opulence used to celebrate my supposed absence. I recalled every cruel glance, every whispered word from Patricia, and the carefully orchestrated lie she'd spread about my death. Anger, grief, and sheer determination merged, sharpening my focus. I would face them all, and I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. I pressed my hand against the heavy wooden door, pushing it with all the strength I had left. The creak of the hinges felt deafening in the otherwise silent room. I paused just long enough to steady myself, letting my gaze sweep over the neatly arranged chairs, the white floral arrangements, the shimmering sunlight filtering through the windows. Everything was so impeccable, so perfect, a stark contrast to my torn, bruised, dirt-covered body. But perfection no longer held power over me. The moment I stepped fully inside, I saw them. Gabriel. My Gabriel, standing tall at the altar, holding Sophie's hand, their faces radiant with joy. The world seemed to slow. His expression, so familiar, so loved, froze mid-motion, eyes widening, lips parting slightly. Sophie's smile faltered, confusion and panic flickering across her features. And Patricia, her carefully maintained composure shattered instantly, her hands clutching her dress as her eyes widened in sheer shock. All three stood frozen, caught in a tableau of stunned silence that made my pulse race with a mix of triumph and dread. I stepped forward, each movement deliberate, the polished floor echoing under my bare feet. The scent of flowers, polished wood, and perfume filled my nose, mingling with the earthy smells clinging to me from my escape. Every gaze in the room, every whisper, every gasp seemed to focus on me. I was here. I was alive. I had returned from the void they'd tried to cast me into, and I would not be ignored. A tremor ran through me as I approached, every muscle in my body taut with anticipation. I imagined Gabriel's shock, Sophie's fear, Patricia's horror, and I savored it, if only briefly, because the weight of everything I'd endured pressed down on me. I had to confront them, to speak the words that had burned in my heart for weeks, the truth that could no longer be silenced. I stopped in the aisle, just a few feet from the couple and Patricia. My breathing was uneven, ragged from exertion and tension, but my eyes, brimming with tears, were steady and unyielding. This was the moment, the culmination of weeks of fear, starvation, and relentless hope. I would not be erased. I would not be silenced, and I would make them all see exactly what they'd tried to destroy. Time seemed to stop as I faced them. Gabriel's hand, still holding Sophie's, froze in midair. Sophie's radiant smile collapsed into disbelief, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. Patricia's face was pale, her carefully cultivated confidence shattered as her jaw slackened. Each of them stared at me as if they'd seen a ghost who was very much alive. My chest tightened with a mix of exhaustion, anger, and grief. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of fabric and the collective shallow breaths of the guests. All eyes were on me, and I felt both exposed and powerful, the rawness of my ordeal somehow giving me a strength I didn't know I possessed. My voice, though hoarse from weeks of confinement, found its way into the room, firm and piercing. I'm not dead. You lied about me. You locked me away and tried to steal my life. How could you betray me like this? The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. I saw Patricia flinch, her hands clutching the folds of her dress. Sophie took a step back, fear and guilt flooding her features. Gabriel's eyes, wide and haunted, locked onto mine. I wanted to scream at him, accuse him, demand why he'd believed their lie. But the sight of him, frozen in shock, twisted my heart. I remembered everything. The whispered promises, the stolen moments, the life we'd imagined together. And I realized that despite all the pain, I still loved him. But love tangled with betrayal is a complicated thing, and I needed him to understand, to see the truth I'd lived through. I stepped closer, letting them all absorb the reality of my presence. Gabriel's eyes filled with tears, confusion, shock, and guilt reflected in his expression. For a brief second, I allowed myself to see the man I loved, the man who'd truly believed I was gone. Then I spoke again, softer this time, my voice trembling but firm. "And Gabriel, I'm here. I survived. You don't have to say anything yet. Just look at me." His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Sophie's hand tightened around his arm as if clinging to something familiar. But he didn't respond. He just stared at me, eyes wide, as if the world had tilted and the ground beneath him was no longer solid. Patricia, petrified, seemed to have aged decades in seconds. I let myself breathe, letting the raw tension fill the space between us. The betrayal, the grief, the sheer injustice of their actions weighed heavily on my chest. And yet, amidst it all, a fragile hope emerged. I saw the man I loved, the man I'd envisioned a life with, and even in his shock, there was recognition. A spark that told me he understood, he regretted, and he still cared. I couldn't stay silent. I had to voice the depth of my pain, the weeks of suffering, the isolation, the hunger, the despair. I lived through every lie, every betrayal. I endured the darkness you thought could erase me. And now I'm here. Gabriel's lips trembled, finally finding a whisper. "Elodie, I didn't know. I thought you were gone." I closed my eyes briefly, swallowing the lump in my throat. Every moment of suffering, every scar, every tear had led to this confrontation. I let my gaze meet his again, steady, demanding, unyielding. "You believed it. You moved on. But I'm here, Gabriel, and I need to know. Do you still feel what you said you felt?" His shoulders shook as he struggled to form words, and I saw remorse and raw longing intertwine on his face. In that moment, I knew the path to reconciliation was narrow, perilous, but possible. I was broken, yes, but defiant. And standing here, facing them all, I realized my mere presence had shifted the balance. I had survived, and I had reclaimed my right to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. The room remained silent for what felt like an eternity, the tension thick and almost unbearable. Gabriel's eyes never left mine, searching, pleading, trying to reconcile the man he'd been with the reality that I was alive before him. Sophie had stepped back. Her confidence evaporated, and Patricia's face was the picture of stunned defeat, her mask of control completely shattered. I felt a cold satisfaction at their shock, but it was fleeting. My heart was focused elsewhere, on Gabriel, on us, on what we could still rebuild together. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out hesitantly, almost afraid I'd vanish again if he moved too quickly. "Elodie, I thought you were gone. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. I never wanted to lose you." His voice shook, raw and full of emotion. The sincerity in his eyes, the tremble of his lips was undeniable. I studied him closely, every nuance, every flicker of guilt and love, trying to discern if he meant it or if fear and social pressure had drawn it out. I took a deep, trembling breath, letting the flood of emotion wash over me. I had survived imprisonment, betrayal, and despair. And yet, here I was, facing the man I loved, who had no idea how much I'd suffered. I allowed myself a brief moment to soften, to acknowledge that despite everything, A part of me still clung to him. And Gabriel, I need to know it's real, that you know what they did, and that you're here with me because you choose me, not because you were deceived. His hands sought mine, trembling slightly as our fingers intertwined. I choose you, Elodie. I always have. I believed the lies, yes, but seeing you now, nothing else matters. I love you. I never stopped. Tears streamed down my face, staining the dirt and sweat of my ordeal. But they were tears of relief, recognition, and hope. I allowed myself to lean into him, my head resting briefly on his chest, feeling the warmth of his embrace. It was grounding, comforting, a promise that we could navigate the aftermath of betrayal together. Patricia and Sophie remained frozen, but the weight of public exposure was clear in their posture. The wedding staff and guests, who had watched in stunned silence, began murmuring among themselves, realizing the beautiful ceremony had been built on lies. Patricia's face flushed with shame and frustration, and Sophie's bravado collapsed entirely. I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. They had underestimated me, but I had reclaimed my place, my voice, my life. I pulled back slightly from Gabriel, searching for truth in his eyes. Are we really going to get through this? He nodded firmly, brushing a strand of hair from my face, a small smile breaking through the tension. We will. I'll make sure of it. We have a second chance, and I won't let anything tear us apart again. I felt the tension drain from my body, the adrenaline giving way to a quiet, victorious calm. Standing there, bruised but unbroken, I realized the journey hadn't just been about survival. It was about reclaiming my agency, my dignity, my love. Gabriel and I had a chance to rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more determined to cherish what we had. We walked together, hand in hand, ignoring the stunned faces behind us. Each step was deliberate, a declaration that we had endured, survived, and chosen each other despite the odds. The room seemed to shimmer with sunlight, every polished surface reflecting our shared triumph. I held my head high, tears still glistening in my eyes, but my posture was strong, defiant, and radiant. Patricia and Sophie's plans had crumbled, their cruelty exposed, and the truth was undeniable. Justice, in its quiet way, had been served. Gabriel and I, though scarred by deception, had found our way back to each other. We embraced the moment, savoring the sweetness of reunion and the certainty that this time, no one could manipulate or steal our happiness. For the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine, unshakable peace. The world that had tried to erase me had been forced to acknowledge my existence. And with Gabriel by my side, I knew we would face whatever challenges lay ahead, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable.